Sarah Martinez had always been the type of person who preferred watching from the shadows rather than standing in the spotlight. At 22 years old, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that most people mistook for shyness. Her dark hair was usually pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore clothes that helped her blend into crowds rather than stand out from them. What people didn't know about Sarah was that beneath her calm exterior lay years of training that had shaped her into something far more dangerous than anyone could imagine. Growing up in a small town in Texas, Sarah had been raised by her grandfather after her parents died in a car accident when she was 8. Her grandfather, retired Army Colonel James Martinez, had seen enough of the world to know that strength didn't always come with loud voices and bold gestures. He taught Sarah that true power often whispered rather than shouted, and that the most effective warriors were often the ones nobody saw coming. From the age of 10, Sarah's grandfather had enrolled her in various martial arts classes. She started with basic karate, then moved to jiu-jitsu, and eventually found her calling in Krav Maga and tactical combat training. Her grandfather also taught her military strategy, situational awareness, and most importantly, how to read people and situations before they became dangerous. By the time she was 18, Sarah could handle herself better than most trained soldiers, but she had never felt the need to prove it to anyone. After high school, Sarah had chosen to attend college rather than follow the military path her grandfather had hoped she might take. She was studying psychology and social work, drawn to helping people who had experienced trauma similar to her own childhood loss. She was particularly interested in working with veterans who struggled to adjust to civilian life after their service. Her quiet nature made people feel comfortable opening up to her, and she had a natural ability to help others process difficult emotions. The incident that would change everything happened on a warm Saturday evening in late spring. Sarah had been walking home from the library where she had spent most of the day working on a research paper about post-traumatic stress in combat veterans. The campus was mostly empty since it was weekend, and she enjoyed the peaceful walk through the tree-lined paths that connected the academic buildings to the residential areas. As she crossed through the central quad, Sarah noticed a group gathered near the Student Union building. At first, she thought it might be some kind of social event or club meeting, but as she got closer, she could sense tension in the air. Her grandfather's training kicked in automatically, and she began to assess the situation with the careful eye he had taught her to use. The group consisted of about 100 young men, all wearing matching t-shirts that identified them as Marine recruits from the nearby military base. They were part of a weekend training exercise that brought them to the college campus for community outreach and recruitment activities. However, what was supposed to be a friendly interaction with college students had apparently turned into something much more aggressive. In the center of the circle, Sarah could see a young woman who looked to be about her own age. The girl appeared to be a foreign exchange student, possibly from somewhere in Asia, based on her features and the way she was dressed. She was clearly terrified and trying to back away from the Marines who had formed a tight circle around her. Some of them were laughing and making comments that Sarah couldn't quite hear from her distance, but their body language told her everything she needed to know. Sarah's first instinct was to call campus security or the police, but she quickly realized that by the time help arrived, the situation could escalate far beyond what it already was. The girl in the center looked like she was on the verge of panic, and some of the Marines were getting more aggressive in their posturing. Sarah could see that what had probably started as crude jokes or inappropriate comments was quickly moving towards something much more serious. Drawing on years of training in situational assessment, Sarah began to analyze the group dynamics. The Marines were clearly feeding off each other's energy, with the more aggressive ones encouraging the others to join in their harassment. She could identify the ringleaders by their body language and the way the others looked to them for cues. There were probably a dozen core aggressors, with the rest following along either out of peer pressure or because they thought it was harmless fun. The young woman in the center was clearly overwhelmed and didn't seem to understand that her attempts to politely decline their attention were only encouraging them. She kept bowing slightly and saying what sounded like apologies, which the Marines seemed to find amusing rather than understanding as a sign of distress. Sarah knew she had to act, but she also knew that charging in without a plan would likely make things worse for everyone involved. Her grandfather had always taught her that the best victories were the ones where nobody had to get hurt, and the most effective interventions were the ones that allowed everyone to save face while de-escalating the situation. She began to move closer, staying in the shadows of the nearby buildings and using her knowledge of positioning to approach without being noticed. As she got nearer, she could hear more of what was being said, and her anger began to build. The Marines were making crude comments about the girl's appearance and culture, suggesting things they wanted to do with her, and laughing when she clearly didn't understand their slang or innuendos. Sarah positioned herself about 20 feet away, still hidden, but close enough to intervene quickly if needed. She took a deep breath and centered herself the way her grandfather had taught her, drawing on the calm focus that years of martial arts training had built into her muscle memory. She knew that if she was going to help this girl, she needed to be smart about it rather than emotional. The situation was rapidly deteriorating. Some of the Marines had started to reach out and touch the girl's hair and clothing, despite her obvious discomfort and attempts to move away. She was saying, "Please no," in heavily accented English, but they either didn't understand or didn't care about her distress. The circle was getting tighter, and Sarah could see that the girl was beginning to hyperventilate with fear. Sarah made her decision. She stepped out of the shadows and began walking directly toward the group with the confident stride her grandfather had taught her to use when she needed to project authority. She kept her expression calm and neutral, but she moved with the kind of purposeful intent that experienced fighters recognize in each other. As she approached the outer edge of the circle, some of the Marines on the perimeter noticed her and began to make room, assuming she was just another student trying to get past. Sarah used this to her advantage, walking directly through their ranks as if she belonged there, her calm confidence making them unconsciously defer to her presence. When she reached the inner circle where the girl was trapped, Sarah made eye contact with the young woman and offered her a small, reassuring smile. Then she turned to face the Marines who had been the most aggressive, her stance shifting subtly into something that anyone with combat training would recognize as a fighting position, even though to casual observers she just looked like she was standing normally. The lead Marine, a tall young man with the kind of swagger that suggested he was used to intimidating people, looked at Sarah with amusement rather than concern. He was probably 6'3" and easily outweighed her by 80 pounds. His friends gathered closer, clearly expecting some entertainment as he prepared to deal with what he saw as an interruption to their fun. "Hey there, sweetheart," he said with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "This doesn't concern you. Why don't you just keep walking and let us finish our conversation with our new friend here?" Sarah looked at him calmly, her expression never changing from the polite but serious look she had maintained since approaching the group. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but carried clearly to everyone in the immediate area. "I think your conversation is over," she said simply. "The young lady would like to leave now, and you're going to let her." The Marines burst into laughter, clearly thinking Sarah was either naive or had seriously misjudged the situation. The lead Marine stepped closer to her, using his height and size to try to intimidate her the way he probably had countless other people. "Is that right?" he said, his voice taking on a mocking tone. "And what exactly are you going to do if we don't? You're going to make all 100 of us move? You and what army, little girl?" Sarah continued to look at him calmly, but those who were paying close attention might have noticed that her weight had shifted slightly onto the balls of her feet, and her hands had moved into positions that would allow her to react instantly to any aggressive movement. "I don't need an army," she said quietly, her voice carrying the kind of certainty that made several of the Marines in the front ranks suddenly look less sure of themselves. "I just need you to be smart enough to recognize when you're making a mistake that's going to cost you more than you want to pay." The lead Marine's expression began to change as something in Sarah's demeanor registered with his subconscious mind. He had enough training to recognize when someone carried themselves like a fighter, and despite her small size and quiet voice, there was something about Sarah that was setting off warning signals in his brain. "Look, lady," he said, his voice losing some of its mocking tone, "we're just having some fun here. Nobody's getting hurt, and this isn't really your business. Why don't you just walk away and let us handle this?" Sarah shook her head slightly, never taking her eyes off his face. "The fun is over," she said simply. "She asked you to stop, and you didn't listen. Now I'm asking you to step back and let her leave. This is the only time I'm going to ask nicely." The tension in the air was becoming palpable. The Marines who had been laughing and joking moments before were now focused entirely on the small woman who had somehow shifted the entire dynamic of the situation just by her presence. Some of them were beginning to look uncertain, while others were getting angry at what they saw as a challenge to their authority. The girl in the center had stopped trying to move away and was watching Sarah with a mixture of hope and disbelief. She clearly couldn't understand how one small woman thought she could stand up to 100 Marines. But something in Sarah's confidence was giving her the first hope she had felt since the harassment had begun. The lead Marine looked around at his friends, clearly feeling the pressure to maintain his authority in front of the group. He had started something that he wasn't sure how to finish without losing face, and Sarah's calm confidence was making him question whether he had misjudged the situation entirely. "You know what?" he said, trying to regain control of the interaction. "I think you've been watching too many movies. This is real life, and you're seriously outnumbered here. Whatever you think you can do, there's 100 of us and one of you. Maybe you should think about that before you say something you're going to regret." Sarah's expression didn't change, but several of the Marines closest to her noticed that she seemed to relax even further, the way experienced fighters do when they're preparing for action. Her grandfather had taught her that the most dangerous time in any confrontation was right before violence erupted, and that the person who stayed calmest in that moment usually had the advantage. "You're right," she said quietly, her voice carrying easily despite its soft tone. "There is one of me and 100 of you. But here's what you need to understand before this goes any further." She paused, letting her words sink in while she continued to maintain eye contact with the lead Marine. Around them, the crowd had gone almost completely silent, sensing that something significant was about to happen. "I don't need to fight all of you," Sarah continued, her voice remaining calm and conversational. "I only need to fight him." She nodded slightly toward the lead Marine. "And when I'm done with him, the rest of you are going to have to decide whether you want to be next or whether you want to let this young lady walk away with her dignity intact." The lead Marine's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Being challenged by anyone in front of his peers was bad enough, but being challenged by a small woman was more than his ego could handle. He started to move towards Sarah, his hands clenching into fists. But as he took his first step, Sarah did something that stopped him cold. She smiled. The smile that crossed Sarah's face wasn't warm or friendly. It was the kind of smile that predators wear when they recognize easier prey than they expected. It was subtle enough that most of the Marines didn't consciously register it, but their subconscious minds picked up on the warning signal, and several of them instinctively took a small step backward. The lead Marine froze mid-step, suddenly uncertain about what he had gotten himself into. Something in that smile reminded him of instructors he had known during basic training, the kind of people who could break you in ways you didn't even know existed. For the first time since the confrontation began, he found himself wondering if he had seriously misjudged the small woman standing in front of him. Sarah could see the doubt creeping into his eyes, and she knew this was the moment when the situation would either de-escalate peacefully or explode into violence. Her grandfather had taught her that most confrontations were won or lost in these crucial seconds when people made the decision whether to fight or back down. She decided to give them one more chance to choose wisely. "Let me tell you what's going to happen if you take another step toward me," she said, her voice still quiet, but carrying a new edge that made everyone within earshot pay attention. "First, you're going to try to grab me because that's what bullies always do when they think they can use their size advantage. But you're not going to be fast enough because you're thinking about what your friends are watching instead of focusing on what I'm doing." The lead Marine started to protest, but Sarah continued speaking as if he hadn't said anything. "When you reach for me, I'm going to step inside your guard and drive my elbow into your solar plexus hard enough to drop you to your knees. While you're trying to remember how to breathe, I'm going to use your own momentum to throw you over my shoulder. You're going to hit the concrete hard enough that you'll be seeing stars for the next 10 minutes. Around them, the crowd of Marines had gone completely silent. Sarah's calm, matter-of-fact description of exactly how she planned to handle their leader was delivered with such quiet confidence that it was impossible to dismiss as empty bragging. "But here's the thing," Sarah continued, her eyes never leaving the lead Marine's face. "I don't want to hurt you. I don't want to embarrass you in front of your friends. I don't want to create a situation where someone gets seriously injured and everyone's military careers get destroyed over something that started as stupid teenage behavior." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "What I want is for you to step back, apologize to this young lady for frightening her, and let her leave with her dignity intact. I want you to remember that you're supposed to be Marines, which means you're supposed to protect people who can't protect themselves, not terrorize them for your own entertainment. The lead Marine looked around at his friends, clearly struggling with the decision. His pride was telling him that he couldn't back down from a challenge, especially not in front of 100 of his peers. But his survival instincts were screaming at him that there was something very dangerous about the small woman who had just calmly explained exactly how she planned to take him apart. One of his friends, a shorter Marine with sergeant stripes, stepped forward and put a hand on his shoulder. "Come on, Marcus," he said quietly. "This isn't worth it. Let's just let the girls go and get back to what we were doing before." Marcus, the lead Marine, shrugged off his friend's hand angrily. "Back off, Rodriguez," he snapped. "I'm not going to let some college girl tell me what to do." He turned back to Sarah, his jaw set with determination. "You want to play tough girl? Fine. Let's see what you've got." Sarah sighed softly, the sound carrying genuine regret. "I was hoping you'd be smarter than this," she said quietly. "Your friend over there has good instincts. You should listen to him." But Marcus was already committed to his course of action. His pride and the pressure of performing in front of his peers had overridden his common sense. He started moving towards Sarah again, this time with clear intent. What happened next took less than 3 seconds, but for everyone watching, it felt like it happened in slow motion. As Marcus reached out to grab Sarah's shoulders, she moved with a fluid grace that seemed almost like dancing. She stepped slightly to her left and forward, slipping inside his reach while simultaneously grabbing his extended arm. Using his own momentum and a textbook jiu-jitsu throw, she pivoted and sent him flying over her shoulder. Marcus hit the concrete with a thud that could be heard throughout the quad. He lay there for a moment, stunned and trying to process what had just happened. True to Sarah's prediction, he was gasping for air and seeing stars from the impact. The crowd of Marines stood in shocked silence. Many of them had witnessed similar throws during their martial arts training, but seeing someone Marcus's size handled so easily by someone Sarah's size was difficult for their minds to process. Sarah looked down at Marcus with genuine concern. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice returning to its earlier gentle tone. "I tried to make sure you landed safely, but concrete doesn't have much give to it." Marcus struggled to sit up, his face red with embarrassment and the effort of breathing. He started to say something angry, but Rodriguez quickly knelt beside him and put a hand on his arm. "Stay down, Marcus," Rodriguez said quietly. "You're lucky she went easy on you. I've seen throws like that put people in the hospital when they're done with bad intentions." Sarah nodded approvingly at Rodriguez. "Your friend is smart," she said to the group in general. "He recognizes the difference between someone showing off and someone who actually knows what they're doing." She turned to look at the rest of the Marines, her expression serious but not threatening. "I want to be very clear about something," she said, her voice carrying easily across the silent crowd. "I don't want to fight any of you. I don't enjoy hurting people, and I don't get any satisfaction from proving that I can handle myself. What I do care about is making sure that young woman over there gets home safely without being traumatized by people who are supposed to represent the best of what our military has to offer." Rodriguez helped Marcus to his feet, and the injured Marine's expression had changed from anger to something approaching respect. Getting thrown by someone half his size had apparently given him a new perspective on the situation. "How did you learn to do that?" he asked, his voice hoarse from having the wind knocked out of him. "My grandfather was Army," Sarah replied simply. "He taught me that strength isn't about how much damage you can do. It's about having the ability to protect people who need protection, and the wisdom to know when that ability is necessary." She looked around at the crowd of Marines, most of whom were now looking distinctly uncomfortable about the entire situation. "You're all training to be warriors," she continued. "That's an honorable calling, and it's one that requires you to be better than ordinary people, not worse. Warriors protect. They don't bully. They don't terrorize innocent people for entertainment. They certainly don't gang up on young women who are clearly frightened and can't defend themselves." The silence that followed her words was heavy with shame. Several of the Marines were looking down at their feet, clearly realizing for the first time how their behavior must have appeared to an outside observer. Sarah walked over to the young foreign exchange student who had been watching the entire confrontation with wide eyes. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked gently, switching to what sounded like Mandarin Chinese. The girl nodded quickly and responded in the same language, her relief evident even to those who couldn't understand her words. Sarah continued speaking with her quietly for a moment, apparently making sure she wasn't injured and asking if she needed any help getting home safely. When she turned back to the Marines, her expression was serious but no longer threatening. "Her name is Lu Wei," she said. "She's a graduate student in international relations from Beijing. She's been in this country for 6 months, and tonight was the first time she's felt genuinely afraid since she arrived. She was walking back to her dorm from the library when you surrounded her." The shame on the faces of many of the Marines was now clearly visible. What had seemed like harmless fun from their perspective had obviously been a terrifying experience for the young woman they had cornered. Rodriguez stepped forward, his expression apologetic. "Ma'am," he said to Lu Wei, "I want to apologize for our behavior. There's no excuse for what happened here, and I'm deeply sorry that we frightened you." Several other Marines echoed his apology, their voices sincere. Marcus, still somewhat shaky from his encounter with the concrete, also offered an apology, though his was clearly more grudging than heartfelt. Sarah nodded approvingly. "That's a good start," she said. "But I want you all to understand something important. This young woman is going to remember this night for the rest of her life. The question is whether she remembers it as the night she was terrorized by American Marines, or the night she learned that even when some Marines make mistakes, there are always others willing to step up and do the right thing." She looked directly at Rodriguez. "You have sergeant stripes, which means you have some leadership responsibility here. What are you going to do to make sure something like this doesn't happen again?" Rodriguez straightened up, clearly taking her question seriously. "Ma'am, I'm going to make sure this incident gets reported to our commanding officer. We have training on cultural sensitivity and appropriate behavior that clearly didn't sink in the way it should have. This kind of behavior is completely unacceptable and goes against everything we're supposed to stand for." Sarah smiled, and this time it was the warm, genuine smile that her friends and family knew well. "That's exactly what I was hoping to hear," she said. "Leadership isn't about rank or position. It's about being willing to stand up and do what's right, even when it's difficult or uncomfortable." She turned to address the larger group. "I know most of you are good people who just got caught up in a bad situation. That happens sometimes, especially when you're young and trying to fit in with a group. But being a Marine means being held to a higher standard. It means being the person others can count on to do the right thing, even when nobody's watching." Liu Wei, who had been listening carefully, even though much of the conversation was in English she might not fully understand, stepped forward and said something in halting English. "Thank you," she said simply, looking at Sarah. "Thank you very much." Sarah smiled at her and responded in Mandarin again, apparently telling her it was no problem and asking if she would like an escort back to her dorm. Li Wei nodded gratefully, and the two women began walking away from the group. As they were leaving, Rodriguez called out to Sarah. "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" Sarah turned back, Lu Wei staying close beside her. "You said your grandfather was Army. Did you ever consider military service yourself?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "I thought about it," she said finally. "My grandfather would have liked that, but I decided I could do more good working with veterans after their service than I could wearing the uniform myself. I'm studying to be a counselor so I can help soldiers who are struggling to readjust to civilian life." Rodriguez nodded respectfully. "That's important work," he said. "A lot of guys could use that kind of help." "I hope so," Sarah replied, "and I hope tonight helps all of you remember why that work is necessary. The young men and women who serve our country deserve to have their service mean something positive. They deserve to know that they fought for values worth defending." As Sarah and Lu Wei walked away across the quad, the Marines stood in uncomfortable silence. The evening that had started as what they thought would be harmless fun had turned into a lesson in humility and accountability that none of them would soon forget. Marcus, still feeling the effects of his landing, shook his head slowly. "Did anyone else feel like we just got schooled by someone's little sister?" he asked. Rodriguez looked at him seriously. "We got schooled by someone who understands what wearing the uniform is supposed to mean better than we do," he replied. "And we're lucky she was willing to teach us instead of just reporting us and ending all our careers." Around them, the other Marines began to disperse, most of them looking subdued and thoughtful. The incident would be talked about for weeks afterward, but not in the boastful way they might have discussed other confrontations. Instead, it would serve as a reminder of the responsibility that came with their training and the consequences of forgetting the values they were supposed to represent. As Sarah and Lu Wei reached the edge of the quad, the young Chinese woman turned to her rescuer with an expression of curiosity mixed with admiration. "How did you know?" she asked in careful English. "How did you know you could handle so many?" Sarah was quiet for a moment as they continued walking. "I didn't know I could handle all of them," she said honestly. "I knew I could handle one, and I was hoping that would be enough to make the others think twice about whether this was really how they wanted to spend their evening." "But what if they had all attacked you at once?" Sarah smiled. "Then I would have been in serious trouble." But people don't usually work that way. Most of the time, if you can show them that their leader isn't as tough as they thought, the followers start reconsidering whether they really want to be part of whatever is happening. They walked in comfortable silence for a while before Li Wei spoke again. "Will you teach me?" she asked suddenly. "Will you teach me how to be strong like that?" Sarah looked at her with surprise. "You want to learn martial arts?" "I want to learn how to not be afraid," Lu Wei said simply. "Tonight I was so scared and I did not know what to do. I never want to feel that helpless again." Sarah nodded, understanding. "I know a good school near campus," she said. "The instructor is a friend of my grandfather's. He's tough but fair, and he'll teach you not just how to fight, but when fighting is necessary and when it isn't." "That would be very good," Lu Wei said gratefully. "Thank you for everything tonight. I think you saved me from something very bad." Sarah shook her head. "I think those Marines are basically good people who just made a bad decision. Most of them seemed genuinely sorry once they understood how their behavior was affecting you. But I'm glad I was there to help de-escalate the situation before anyone got seriously hurt." As they reached the dormitory building where Liu Wei lived, the young woman turned to face Sarah one more time. "Can I ask you something else?" she said. "Of course. Were you really not afraid, even when there were so many of them?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "I was concerned," she said finally. "Anytime you're dealing with a potentially violent situation, you have to be aware of all the ways things could go wrong. But afraid? No, I wasn't afraid. My grandfather taught me that fear comes from feeling powerless, and I never feel powerless when I know I have the skills and knowledge to handle whatever situation I'm in." Lu Wei smiled. "I hope someday I can feel that confident." "You will," Sarah assured her. "Confidence like that isn't something you're born with. It's something you build, one small victory at a time. Tonight was your first victory, even though you might not realize it yet. How is tonight a victory for me? You were the one who saved me. Tonight is a victory because you learned something important about yourself and about the world. You learned that even when bad things happen, there are good people willing to step up and help. You learned that being afraid doesn't make you weak, and you learned that there are ways to become stronger. Those are all important lessons that will serve you well in the future." Liu Wei nodded thoughtfully. "I think I understand. Thank you again, Sarah. I hope we can be friends." "I'd like that," Sarah replied warmly. "And remember, if you ever feel unsafe or need help with anything, don't hesitate to call me. That's what friends are for." As Lu Wei disappeared into her dormitory building, Sarah began the walk back to her own apartment. The evening hadn't gone at all the way she had planned, but she felt satisfied that she had been able to help someone who needed it, and perhaps teach a valuable lesson to some young men who had forgotten what their training was supposed to mean. Her grandfather would be proud, she thought to herself, not because she had demonstrated her fighting skills, but because she had used them in service of protecting someone who couldn't protect themselves. That, he had always taught her, was what true strength was really about. The days following the incident in the quad passed quietly for Sarah, but she could sense that something had shifted in the atmosphere around campus. Word of what had happened spread quickly through the student body, though the details became increasingly exaggerated with each retelling. By the time the story had made its full rounds, Sarah had supposedly taken on 200 Marines single-handedly and sent half of them to the hospital. Sarah tried to ignore the whispers and stares that followed her as she walked across campus. She had never wanted to be the center of attention, and the growing legend around her actions made her increasingly uncomfortable. She preferred to let her academic work speak for itself and to help others quietly without fanfare or recognition. 3 days after the confrontation, Sarah was sitting in the library working on her research paper when someone approached her table. She looked up to see Rodriguez, the Marine sergeant who had shown good judgment during the incident. He was wearing civilian clothes and carried himself with the respectful bearing of someone who had come to deliver important news. "Ms. Martinez?" he said quietly, mindful of the library setting. "I'm Sergeant Rodriguez. We met the other night in the quad. Could I speak with you for a moment?" Sarah nodded and gestured to an empty chair at her table. "Of course, Sergeant. Please, sit down. And call me Sarah." Rodriguez sat down carefully, clearly choosing his words thoughtfully before speaking. "I wanted to update you on what's happened since that night," he said, "and to thank you again for the way you handled that situation. You probably prevented something that could have ruined a lot of careers and hurt a lot of people." "I'm glad everyone was able to walk away safely," Sarah replied. "What kind of update did you want to give me?" "Well, first, I reported the incident to our commanding officer the next morning, just like I said I would." Captain Morrison was not happy when he heard what had happened. Not happy at all. Rodriguez paused, seeming to gather his thoughts before continuing. "The captain called all 100 of us in for a meeting. He made it very clear that our behavior was completely unacceptable and went against everything we're supposed to represent as Marines. He also made it clear that if anything like this ever happened again, there would be immediate disciplinary action that would likely end military careers." Sarah nodded approvingly. That sounds like the right response from a good commanding officer. It was. But that wasn't all. The captain also instituted some changes to our training program. We're now required to attend additional sessions on cultural sensitivity, appropriate behavior in civilian settings, and conflict de-escalation. We're also going to be doing community service projects around the campus and the local area to rebuild our relationship with the civilian community. Sarah smiled. "Those all sound like positive changes that will benefit everyone involved." "They are, but there's something else I wanted to tell you. The captain wants to meet you." Sarah raised an eyebrow, surprised by this development. "He wants to meet me? Why?" "He was impressed by the way you handled the situation. He said anyone who could de-escalate a confrontation like that without anyone getting seriously hurt clearly has skills that the military could use. He wanted me to ask if you'd be willing to come to the base and speak with him about possible opportunities." Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering this unexpected offer. "What kind of opportunities?" "I'm not entirely sure," Rodriguez admitted. "But I know the captain has been looking for people with your kind of skills to help with training programs. People who understand both the military mindset and civilian perspectives. Your background in psychology and your obvious tactical abilities make you exactly the kind of person he's been trying to find." Sarah shook her head slowly. "I appreciate the offer, Sergeant, but I don't think military service is the right path for me. I've chosen to focus on helping veterans after their service rather than serving myself." Rodriguez nodded understandingly. "I figured that might be your answer, given what you told us the other night. But the captain asked me to tell you that this wouldn't necessarily mean enlisting. The military contract with civilian specialists all the time for training and counseling services. You could potentially work with us without wearing the uniform." This possibility intrigued Sarah more than she had expected. What would that kind of work involve? "From what I understand, it would involve helping develop and implement training programs designed to prevent situations like what happened the other night. Teaching conflict resolution, cultural sensitivity, appropriate use of force, that kind of thing. You'd be working with young Marines to help them understand not just how to fight, but when fighting is appropriate, and when other solutions are better." Sarah found herself genuinely interested in this possibility. It would allow her to use her grandfather's training in a way that could prevent problems, rather than just reacting to them after they occurred. "Would you be willing to at least meet with Captain Morrison?" Rodriguez asked. "Even if you decide you're not interested in working with us, he'd like the chance to thank you personally for what you did." Sarah considered this for a moment before nodding. "I suppose I could meet with him. When would this be? Would this weekend work for you? Saturday morning? That should be fine. What should I expect from this meeting?" Rodriguez smiled. The captain is a good man. He's tough but fair, and he genuinely cares about the Marines under his command. He's been in the service for 20 years, and he's seen enough to know good leadership when he sees it. I think you'll like him." After Rodriguez left, Sarah found herself unable to concentrate on her research paper. The possibility of working with the military in a training capacity was something she had never considered, but it felt like it might be a way to honor her grandfather's legacy, while still pursuing her chosen path of helping others. That evening, Sarah called her grandfather to tell him about the developments. Colonel Martinez listened quietly as she described the incident in the quad and the subsequent offer from Captain Morrison. "I'm proud of you, Sarah," he said when she finished. "You handled that situation exactly the way I would have hoped. You used your skills to protect someone who needed protection, and you did it in a way that taught rather than just punished." "Thank you, Grandpa. But I'm not sure what to do about this offer from the captain. It's not exactly what I had planned for my career." Colonel Martinez was quiet for a moment before responding. "Sometimes the best opportunities are the ones we never planned for. The work this captain is describing sounds like it could have a real impact on a lot of young lives, and it would let you use everything I've taught you in a way that prevents problems rather than just reacting to them. But what about my plans to work with veterans as a counselor? Who says you can't do both? The military uses civilian contractors for all kinds of specialized work. You could potentially develop a practice that serves both active duty personnel and veterans. That would give you a much broader perspective on the challenges facing military families." Sarah hadn't considered this possibility, but it made sense. Working with active duty personnel could help her better understand the experiences that shaped the veterans she hoped to counsel later. Saturday morning arrived quickly, and Sarah found herself driving to the Marine base with a mixture of nervousness and curiosity. She had chosen to dress professionally but not formally, wanting to show respect for the military environment without trying to be something she wasn't. Captain Morrison's office was exactly what Sarah had expected: organized, functional, and decorated with the kind of awards and photographs that spoke to a long and distinguished career. The captain himself was a man in his early 40s with the bearing of someone accustomed to command, but the eyes of someone who genuinely cared about the people under his authority. "Ms. Martinez," he said, rising from his desk to shake her hand. Sarah sat in the chair across from his desk, noting that he waited for her to sit before taking his own seat, a small gesture of courtesy that spoke well of his character. "Sergeant Rodriguez has filled me in on what happened in the quad the other night," Captain Morrison began. "I want to start by apologizing for the behavior of my Marines. What happened was completely unacceptable and doesn't represent the values we try to instill in our people."
"I appreciate that, Captain," Sarah replied.
"But I think most of your Marines are good people who just made a bad decision. They seemed genuinely remorseful once they understood how their behavior was affecting the young woman they had cornered." Captain Morrison nodded. "That's exactly the kind of perspective I was hoping to hear from you. Too many people would have written them off as bad soldiers based on one incident, but you saw the potential for them to do better. Everyone deserves the chance to learn from their mistakes and do better next time." "I agree completely. And that brings me to why I asked you here." Captain Morrison leaned forward slightly, his expression becoming more serious. "I've been working for the past 2 years to develop better training programs for our junior Marines. Programs that teach not just tactical skills, but judgment, cultural awareness, and conflict resolution. The kind of skills you demonstrated the other night." Era listened carefully as he continued. "The problem I keep running into is that most of the people who have these skills are either already in the military, which means they're part of the same culture that sometimes creates these problems, or they're civilians who don't understand the military mindset well enough to connect with the Marines they're trying to teach." "And you think I might be able to bridge that gap? From what Sergeant Rodriguez has told me, you understand both worlds. You had the tactical skills and military background through your grandfather to speak credibly to Marines, but you also have the civilian perspective and psychological training to help them understand the broader impact of their actions." Sarah found herself increasingly interested in what Captain Morrison was proposing. What would this kind of work actually involve? Several things. First, I'd want you to help develop curricula for training programs that go beyond basic cultural sensitivity. Programs that teach Marines how to interact appropriately with civilian populations, especially in potentially tense situations. He paused to gauge her reaction before continuing. Second, I'd want you to work directly with Marines who have had disciplinary issues or who are struggling with the transition from military to civilian thinking. Young men and women who have the technical skills to be good Marines but need help developing the judgment and interpersonal skills to represent the Corps properly. That sounds like counseling work, which is exactly what I want to do, Sarah said. But would the Marines be receptive to that kind of help from someone who isn't in the military? Captain Morrison smiled. That's where your demonstration the other night becomes important. Word has gotten around about what happened in the quad. These Marines know you can handle yourself physically, which means they'll respect your ability to understand their world. But they also know you chose not to hurt anyone when you could have, which shows them a different kind of strength than what they're used to seeing. Sarah considered this perspective. Her grandfather had often told her that respect in military circles had to be earned through demonstration rather than just credentials. And apparently her actions had earned her the kind of respect that would allow her to be effective in this role. There's one more thing, Captain Morrison added. I'd want you to help me identify Marines who have the potential to be leaders and mentors for their peers. Marines like Sergeant Rodriguez, who showed good judgment during the incident and has the respect of his fellow Marines. I want to create a program where the best Marines help train and guide the ones who are struggling. This idea particularly appealed to Sarah. Rather than trying to impose change from outside the military culture, it would involve empowering the best people within that culture to be agents of positive change. How would this work practically? Sarah asked. I'm still a full-time student and I don't want to abandon my academic goals. The position would be part-time and flexible around your academic schedule. You'd work with us perhaps 10 to 15 hours per week during the school year, with the possibility of more intensive work during summer breaks. You'd be paid as a civilian contractor, and the work would actually complement your academic studies by giving you practical experience in the field you're planning to enter. Sarah realized that this opportunity could provide exactly the kind of real-world experience that would make her a more effective counselor when she graduated. Working with active-duty Marines would teach her things about military culture and psychology that she could never learn in a classroom. Can I think about this for a few days? She asked. Of course. This is a big decision, and I want you to be sure it's the right choice for you, but I hope you'll seriously consider it. I think you could make a real difference in the lives of a lot of young Marines, and I think the experience would be valuable for your future career as well. As Sarah drove home from the meeting, she found herself thinking not just about the job offer, but about the broader implications of what Captain Morrison was proposing. The work would allow her to honor her grandfather's military legacy while pursuing her own goals of helping others. It would give her practical experience that would make her a better counselor for veterans. And it would allow her to help prevent the kind of incidents that had brought her to the captain's attention in the first place. That evening, she called Liu Wei to see how her new friend was adjusting after their traumatic encounter. Liu Wei answered on the second ring, her voice bright and cheerful. Sarah, I'm so glad you called. I have been hoping to talk to you. How are you doing? Are you feeling better about what happened? Much better. And I have good news. I went to that martial arts school you recommended, and I had my first lesson yesterday. The instructor, Mr. Chen, is very nice, and he says I have good natural balance. Sarah smiled. That's wonderful. How did it feel? It felt empowering, Liu Wei said with enthusiasm. For the first time since I came to this country, I felt like I was learning how to be strong, instead of just hoping other people would protect me. Learning to protect yourself isn't just about physical techniques. It's about building confidence and developing the ability to assess situations before they become dangerous. Mr. Chen said the same thing. He also said something interesting. He said that the best fighters are the ones who never have to fight because they know how to avoid trouble before it starts. Your instructor sounds very wise. That's one of the most important lessons in martial arts. Liu Wei was quiet for a moment before speaking again. Sarah, can I tell you something? That night in the quad when you stepped in to help me, it wasn't just because you knew how to fight. It was because you saw someone who needed help and you decided to act. That's the kind of person I want to be. Sarah was touched by Liu Wei's words. You already are that kind of person, Liu Wei. You just needed to learn that you had the strength to act on your good intentions. Maybe. But I'm learning that strength isn't just about being able to defend yourself. It's about being willing to defend others who can't defend themselves. As Sarah hung up the phone, she realized that Liu Wei had articulated something important about the choice she was facing. The opportunity Captain Morrison was offering wasn't just about using her skills to help individual Marines. It was about being part of a larger effort to create a culture where people like Liu Wei would be less likely to find themselves in danger in the first place. The next Monday morning, Sarah called Captain Morrison and accepted his offer. She would begin working with the Marine training program the following week, starting with a small pilot group of Marines who had shown leadership potential but needed help developing their interpersonal skills. As she prepared for this new chapter in her life, Sarah thought about her grandfather and the lessons he had taught her. He had always said that the measure of a warrior wasn't how many fights they won, but how many fights they prevented. Now she would have the chance to put that philosophy into practice on a scale she had never imagined. The quiet girl who preferred to stay in the shadows had found herself thrust into a role where her actions could influence hundreds of young Marines and, through them, countless civilians who would interact with those Marines throughout their careers. It wasn't the path she had planned, but it felt like exactly the path she was meant to take. 3 weeks later, as Sarah watched a group of Marines practice conflict de-escalation techniques with volunteer students from the college, she received a text message from Liu Wei. Guess what? Mr. Chen says I'm ready to help teach the beginners class. I never thought I'd be strong enough to help others learn to be strong too. Sarah smiled as she typed her response. I'm proud of you. You've learned that real strength isn't about being the toughest person in the room. It's about being the person others can count on to do the right thing. As she hit send, Sarah realized that this message applied as much to herself as it did to Liu Wei. She had found her calling not as the quiet girl who stayed in the shadows, but as someone who stepped into the light when others needed her guidance. And for the first time in her life, that felt exactly right.